Good morning. So I'm coming to you with a different setup today. Hold on, let me get started here. I am traveling. Well, traveling meaning like I'm house sitting near in the same city, but definitely I lost my lighting. I didn't really want to bring anything unnecessary with me. So I am back on my regular webcam, no lighting here, but that's cool. This is about consistency. When we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about how do you align with transformation, if you want to do something different with your life and you're the person who identifies okay, I'm inconsistent, I don't have motivation, I don't do this, I don't do that, you got to find the small ways where you're going to be consistent. So showing up at the same time, Fridays at 10 a.m. for me was the consistency. Not having the particular setup with all the lighting and background is not the consistency that I'm going for. My consistency is coming from the fact that I need to be authentic and I need to be honest and open with my audience. So whoever is joining me today, thank you, thank you, thank you. So okay, so today, what is the date today? July 14th. Ooh, 5 days. 5 days till my birthday. It is Cancer season. I know we sometimes get a bad rap, but I don't fully subscribe to the zodiac, so I feel like that's a conversation for another time. But I think today's topic is really a great thing for, honestly, the summertime. Because if you take it literally, today's topic we're talking about is the mask. What does the mask mean when it comes to mental health? What is masking and all these kind of, trendy terms when it comes to mental health? Thank you. And what is the detriment? What are some of the barriers as to why people are struggling with this? But before we get in that, let me just kind of recap who I am, kind of giving y'all a better idea of what do I do? Why am I talking about this? So my name is Sara. I am a licensed clinical social worker and clinical addiction specialist. So I've been in my profession for about 10 years now. Can't believe that still. I'll be 34 next week, and I have a career. I love it, but I'm like, oh, wow, it's been 10 years. And so this vulnerable conversation about transformation, how to align with transformation, is really about how to help everyone who is interested in growing and developing their mental health using, the example that I've set in practicing what I preach, just because the shit was hard. I'm not gonna lie. It is a lot of work to just keep up with what we have going on in this world today, the stress levels that we have. And taking care of your mental health is vital for not only just the longevity of your life, but for the optimization of your life. If you want certain things in life and you've never had those because you came from, a real traumatic background or just low income. I grew up with a blue collar working father who passed away before he could contribute long-term to my life, either financially or lessons wise. And then thankfully I had my mom, but I've been on my own for quite a while. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. However, there are a lot of everyone's barriers look different. And so my role as a clinical social worker and a therapist is working with people to learn how to recover that lifestyle, to recover and overcome those barriers in life. And it takes everyone a different way and a different journey. So I've kind of collected a lot of information and insight along the way of doing that. And, that's what I am trying to kind of offload here in these lives for people to, to thought prompt for what do you need to think about when you are trying to get back up on your feet, not be hopeless, and really make a difference in your life, but then also in obtaining your goals. So yes, God's way is I was actually thinking about that the other day. This is a comment on Instagram for people watching from YouTube and Facebook. There's a comment about just doing it God's way. And I will say this from someone in myself who grew up Catholic, had my attempt at Christianity. The Bible and understanding God's way it's actually, it's a very unique perspective, but it's just not that simple. It's just not. If that's the belief system that you've had for the majority of your life, I think it could be that simple. But for a lot of people, learning and understanding that, but then also being products of an environment where that was and can be a very manipulative statement for people to get what they want and to mask abusive dynamics. I'm very cautious when I use the word abuse, especially with my clients, not just because it's not even a trigger. It's more about everyone's form of abuse looks different and feels different. And what I promote is everyone taking an individual look at their own stuff, why they're saying the things that they're saying, and to realize the impact and the intention behind the things that we say, because what works for me is not going to work for someone else. Now, there are some similarities. There are some similarities in a lot of ways that can work what has worked for me and worked for other people, because what I did are things that other people did and are evidence-based that are we just have to, if it doesn't work for you, it's figuring out the fine tuning of how to make it work for you. So it's interesting that, when we talk about religion, that is kind of leading right into today's topic of the mask and mental health. Now, if you're learning, there's a lot of people at different stages, right? Like I've got some, whether it's clients or even my friends and my colleagues, some people who are doing a lot of their own healing work are starting to learn and have an information on loading phase. So they're learning about what the diagnosis, that if they've received or if they've been considering a diagnosis, they're learning more about it. They're intaking information. Now, if you go back to some of my other videos on YouTube, I did a talk on information and mental health and some of the downfalls of having too much information when you have and you struggle with anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or whatever the case may be. So in my role for people is typically to help people, like once you get that diagnosis, once you get that indication of like, hey, this is what you got, this is what you got, this is what you're dealing with. My role is this is what you do with it. So we work on, just like if you, I use this analogy quite often. If you break your ankle, you're going to the doctor, you're getting surgery, you get a diagnosis before the surgery, hopefully, and you then in turn, once you have the surgery, you go and you get physical therapy and you do small exercises over time to rehabilitate and to recover your muscle growth, your what's that word? Your flexibility of your ankle or something, right? It's physical therapy. Mental health therapy is just physical therapy for the mind. It's sometimes learning skills and learning different approaches and perspectives to how to manage your emotions, the energy that you create. Emotion is energy in motion, and the ability to activate new behaviors. And if you have a trauma background, most people do, especially if you're from the United States or any country, but like if you have any kind of trauma or stress in your background, learning to manage and regulate through those things is imperative. And that's what you do in therapy. That's really what my role is for people. So, but one of the biggest barriers that I would say to recovery is today's topic, the mask and the mental health. So if you're learning about these diagnoses, if you're learning more about, okay, what does this mean? More than likely, not every time, but more than likely, a lot of people have been wearing a mask in front of a lot of other people. So if there's anyone listening right now, if you have any thoughts about like, have you heard this term? And what does it mean to you? Like if you've heard either masking or like wearing the mask, what does that mean to you? Because what it means to me is because for a long time in my own life, I faked it. I faked it around. I didn't want to be around certain people. I didn't want to not say certain things. That was probably a double negative that I don't need. So let me turn that around. I withheld certain perspectives because I was fearful of the consequence of someone saying something to me. I restricted my own voice. I put a mask on. And if first of all, if you've lived through COVID, it's not that complicated. It's literally like wearing a mask. We've been wearing masks physically to help, limit the transmission of viruses for the last few years. But when it comes to mental health, masking is that concept of that you put on a certain presentation, and when you meet people, when you run into people, you are not the authentic version of yourself. Okay, so that is kind of the concept of masking. A lot of this is, being discussed within the arena of autism and how people who are higher functioning in their intellectual abilities, or it just, it means that there's a deficit in some different areas, because when you're high in intellect, you're not going to have as much energy to learn engagement or social dynamics or social cues, stuff like that. So what happens a lot of the time is, in order to fit in, that's just what we want to do, right? Social media, we just got to fit in. We got to find all the trends. We got to wear all the nice clothes. We got to say things the way. What it's doing is, if you're wearing that mask because you don't feel like you can be accepted for who you are, the struggles that you have, and what it is, the interests that you have, and the things that you like in this life, that you have to put on this mask to be socially acceptable. You see this a lot in corporate America. You see this a lot in just any kind of, social dynamic that's not your inner circle. And then you also see it in your inner circle. So people not allowing themselves to really just kind of let loose because they're afraid of what people are going to think of them. They're afraid of the judgment, which is very real, because I see stigmas and I hear stigmas about mental health all day, every day, on social media, on even in my own world, And I discover biases and stigmas that I didn't even really know that I had, sometimes, on the daily. I was just having a conversation with a client yesterday about internalized ageism when it comes to choosing a partner. Like, why as a woman do we have this age range of things that is acceptable, like something that we're not attracted to? And not that her decision or my decision would change to have this particular age range, but we never really examine it, because we're not willing to, one, either do the work, but we also don't really know that there's work to be done. Because if we're wearing a mask, if we're thinking that like, oh, this is just the way that we are, then we never actually discover that we could be any different. And the detriment to wearing that mask is that you stay limited. You stay limited in the belief systems that you were given as a child and provided for, which may not be bad. They may be doing great things in this world. They may have done great things for you before, but you also may be missing something. So if you think about it as like a literal mask, right? Like, one of, I think, more of the better visuals that I've used is, if you ever saw Jim Carrey's The Mask from, I think it was like the 1990s, that movie. I think we all know if you don't know the visual, but it's like, once he put it on, it was this bright green mask that literally just suffocated him. Like, this story, this is a really great movie for people to understand that concept of like what masking can really do, is because it completely makes you a different person, and you lose sight on what's actually important to you, because you're putting on this show for everyone else to get the attention of the girl that you like, to be the life of the party. And if that's not you all the time, then when you are by yourself, you're going to feel void. Feel the void. You're going to feel lost, because you don't really know who's there. So the truth, I mean, when you wear the mask for other people, you are wearing the mask for yourself as well. You don't have as good of in clarity on what are the core values that keep you grounded. What are the things that actually you can do intentionally to make yourself happy. And the longer that you keep that mask on, the longer it will take for you to determine those things, because you're just not going to know. The fear of the unknown is always going to be there. Even after my clients do the extensive work to manage their anxiety, and they do it, but I always prepare them to be ready, to be prepared. I prepare them to be prepared for the fear of the unknown, because that is the one thing in life that we're always going to be faced with, is that we cannot. Now, some people claim to tell the future, and I myself can be one of them sometimes, of like, I know certain things of just, I know probabilities because I study patterns and behavior and stuff, but I can't tell the future. I can provide a probability of what someone's going to do, but I can't tell the future, and we cannot tell the future. So the more that you keep this mask on, the longer that you keep it on, the longer it can take for not only you to activate and learn those things about yourself that keep you safe naturally. And so what are those things? Now, the core values of this talk, vulnerability is the first one. There is a lot of culture right now, especially at least on social media. Like, I'm trying to keep my time split between social media and like actually the real world. But even in the real world, is that like, oh, I just need authenticity. I just need authenticity. Absolutely. Authenticity comes hand in hand a lot of times with vulnerability, but they are different. So what are the differences? Authenticity is going to be you taking that mask off and like really truly embracing that, you know what, I am who I am. I really put forth effort to be unapologetically me. So I don't know if I'm laughing because those terms are very trendy right now. And this is why I push past that authenticity, because it is great. It is absolutely necessary, but there's also more, and there's depth to authenticity. And that goes into the realm of vulnerability. Why vulnerability? Why vulnerability? Because vulnerability is the only way that you can hold space for growth. Because if you think about what we've already associated with authenticity is unapologetically me. It is what it is. And for some people, I'm not saying for everyone, but for some people, that comes with a limitation. And it's usually unseen. It's usually because it's like, I just fully accept who I am. I love everything I am, that there's no other seeking for more. And that's not, you do want to find balance between seeking for more, but a lot of that's timing. But it's also an acceptance of like things that may not be quite healthy for you or for the relationships that you have. Because if you are authentically you and unapologetically you, then you limit yourself to be able to recognize and take responsibility for the impact that you do have. Like, oh, it's just who I am. I am who I am. It is what it is. You got to just love me. I have a saying that I actually use is love me or understand me. But the difference between there, and this is just, I do a value perspective. So, provide a critique here. Love is a choice. So it actively implies that you have to do the work to understand who I am and where I am right now to fully accept who I am. Or you have to find a way to understand this is who I am. And if you can do that, then you're obviously worth the perspective for you to challenge me to be a better person. That's why I say that love me or understand me is because they both require not only the person to be in a chronic state of evaluation, but they also require me to be vulnerable enough to know that I cannot be limited by my current state of being. So drop me a comment if that makes sense. The difference between authenticity and vulnerability, and why sometimes being authentically you can also be a limitation in your growth. Because once you fully accept that, that's just where you are, but you accept it. You provide yourself relief. That a lot of the times, once we have relief, we stop searching for discomfort, and that is where vulnerability switches over to be a leading value and for success, is because life is going to happen and it's going to be really uncomfortable. And if you hold on to just being authentically you, then you're less likely to be able to change when things change around you. So when you take a look at doing your self-work, if you're fear vulnerability, because this is one of those barriers of like what keeps people not taking the mask off, and it's the discomfort of being vulnerable. I don't want to say it's always fear of vulnerability, but there usually is a fear that is attached innately, and it causes a stress response for people. And then we project it, and we don't even actually know that it's our own because we think it's happening to us. No, it's happening for us. Because really getting down to like, I use this visual for people because one of those authentic things that I thought was weird for the longest time was that I love to watch pimple popping videos, right? And if you ever get to the bottom of a pore, you can actually see the hole in the skin of where the pore was released from the clogged oil and sebum, right? And there are some videos where it's like you get a lot out, but you don't ever see that opening. Vulnerability is that opening. Vulnerability is leaving yourself open to be like, you know what? I feel unprotected, but I'm naturally protected. I know who I am. I know where source energy lies. I know that I'm in control of how I regulate energy through my body and in turn put it out into the world. And so when we stop at authenticity, we limit ourselves from vulnerability and we limit ourselves from growth. We limit ourselves from healing because we're also still keeping that mask like almost like on half of our face just in case someone doesn't accept us. I see it all the time with people, and there's stages. Now, I want you guys to hear me when I say this. It's not like you're not doing good enough. You're absolutely doing good enough. But I also want to hold you just like a trainer would hold, like, no, one more rep. You got to keep going. Me as a mental health therapist, as the type of therapeutic consultant that I am, I'm going to show you, affirm to you all the hard work that you've done, but then also show you that there's still a little bit more that can be swept up every single time that you get up and during the day. There's always going to be more. And if you think about it, that is the one thing that most people get overwhelmed by and become anxious, become depressed, become bipolar, because they have had way too much happen to them and they don't see it as happening for them. And that's been my role for a lot of people, is help them go through that emotional stuff, sometimes even the physical stuff. I had one client one time where actually, like, I'm a very hands-on type of therapist. And so I had a session in home because there was some hoarding tendencies, because there was a prolonged grief situation and where their partner had died by suicide. And so their home, my client's home, they started to collect things because they were overwhelmed because they became a single parent in a matter of that. And they had kids, they had animals, they had this huge house, so much space. And then they moved to a different house. They moved all of this with there. And so then we had to go through some of the physical things. And this is where the term body doubling is important for people who are trying to understand someone who struggles with mental health issues, is that sometimes just your presence, just your physical support of being there and present for people can be the catalyst to change. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You just have to hold space with them. And that's a lot of times why people, they're embarrassed because, no one wants to see like, if you look at the clutter on this counter right now, I'll be like, I'm embarrassed. But part of my journey has been, as an authentic being, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be vulnerable, that like, if I show you my stuff, that if you judge me, now this is also the trick, because over time, what you're working on is cultivating a new belief system that being honest is also what makes you that strength, that inner strength, that if someone judges you, you just know that's their own self-judgment about the mess that they would and how they would react, not how you matter. Their reaction is their problem. And in my course and my program, we go over the intricacies of boundaries. I don't go into boundaries on my lives because there is a lot of intricate information about what boundaries are for people. And there's a lot of misconceptions. But saying, and honestly, the mask is a form of a boundary. It is literally, it's an invisible, more of an intellectual boundary that has been misinformed due to hurt, due to trauma, due to stress, that we create a barrier for other people to keep people out of our protected space. But what's happening is we're also staying stuck. It's keeping us stuck in with all of the negative thinking, all the unhealthy self-talk, all of the toxic traits that we're actually putting out in the world that we can't really do anything about consistently until you take the mask off. Okay. So one of those barriers and for why people don't really they can't really take that mask off is they're not willing to be vulnerable. They fear that vulnerability, that fear like being completely honest, open, and willing to accept the faults of themselves and no faults of anyone else. You're not, I'm asking, when I work with my clients, I'm asking them to be able to observe other people, but only observe their self most of the time. It's natural. We're built to look outward. We can't not, reconfigure our eyes in the way that they sit in our sockets. So therapy is about training ourselves to turn inward and then to do some of the work. A lot of one of the next biggest barrier for why the mask can't come off for people is judgment. We're in a world of making judgments. We have a whole social war right now about the perception of judgments based off skin color, based off of gender transitions, and that's so transphobia. Like, we have this whole war on a level that if you were to stop trying to fight that fight, it wouldn't go anywhere and it wouldn't stop. No one would win. But you would see the power of knowing to go inward, of being able to not be and judge those constructs that are only made by man and other people's judgments, and actually take a look at where the judgment's coming from. Because if you're out there playing in other people's judgments, you're likely to do some judging as well. And so when we are exposed to all of those judgments, when we are, what's the word I want to use? Overwhelmed with being judged, we start to lose focus on where the judgment's actually coming from. Like, if you were to think about these like as bullets, whizzing by from a distance, there's just too many things going on that you can't see the source of whose bullet came from where. And that's judgments. And judgments are like thousands of like little paper cuts for people with mental health issues because they have not been protected. And they also now adapt a belief that judging self is more productive than taking responsibility. So one of the biggest barriers of keeping the mask on and why healing can't be done for other people is we're judging ourselves. You think that like you can't air your dirty laundry because someone's going to judge it. You're judging your own dirty laundry and therefore you can't air it. You can't clean out the reservoir of your mind because you are already judging your dirty laundry before anyone else does. And I work, that's a very common problem that I deal with my clients with is, trying to get an assessment of where people are in that, because that process is quick. It's an automatic. It's almost like if you ever think about how many steps does it take for you to turn on a water faucet? Break down what happens. We don't think like that, because for me, if I give you an example, because I only came up with this example because there's a sink right over there, is that I'm sitting in a chair right now. In order for me to turn on the water, I just be like, oh, I'll go turn on the water. That's how we describe it for ourselves. But what it takes is actually I have to push back. I have to well, actually, I skipped a step. I have to move my hands. I have to put them on the counter. I have to push my chair back. I have to put my feet on the ground because they're technically on that little thing of the chair that, and then I put my feet on the ground. I push up and I stand up. I turn my body. I walk over to the sink. I reach my hand out. I touch the sink thing and I move the sink, or I move the handle on. So because we don't break down all the different steps into just a maneuver that we can do so easily, over time, what happens is we learn the appreciation of how much work actually goes into something like that. And we allow certain judgments to come in about like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm weak. No, you just haven't been able to overcome a lot of those particular processes to be able to follow through with the task to completion. And all these judgments start to happen, and they start to snowball, and then they start to cause this stress that a lot of the times, I will tell you, as human beings, we can endure so much stress. It's not a flex. And sometimes I want it to be so bad because it justifies, it affirms like, yo, Sarah, you are doing the hard thing. I know I'm doing the hard thing, but it is not a flex to be like, yeah, I can handle the stress so well. I've lost all this weight because I learned how to manage the stress. There's also a little bit of, it's bittersweet. It's not like because we still, the thing is that when I say like, oh, I can handle this much stress, I now reinforce the inner narrative of why people just need to keep going and learn how to manage stress and not learn how to prevent it. Like we as a society have to kind of start turning this big old bus that we're driving into the future, into a different direction. And we need to start looking at more ways of reducing the amount of stress offput, or what I call the trauma footprint. Each individual person has a way that they contribute to the amount of stress that we're experiencing in this world. If you look at it from a perspective of economics, it is the stock exchange. We all influence how the economy roles, and we're all influencing how much the stress economy and the atmosphere, if you look at it in global warming perspective, it's carbon emissions. That's why I call it the trauma footprint, because we have carbon footprints. From an emotional standpoint, our vibe that we produce, the energy that we produce every day, if we are not recycling it well, then we are contributing to a trauma footprint in our own lives and the lives of other people, and we don't even realize it. And you realize it when it happens to you, but then when it happens to you, it's really overwhelming. It's stressful, and it makes you want to put that mask back on because you feel too vulnerable to tell the truth. So another point, if anyone's trying to figure, okay, what is this woman talking about? She's talking about the mask. I told you what, but the mask is as simple as like, hey, how you doing? And you go like, oh, yeah, I'm really good. I'm good. How are you doing? That's mask. Because if you ask me how I'm doing, be like, you know what? It's been a really tough week. I've been house sitting. I've been back and forth. I have not been on my normal routine, but overall, it actually has made me feel really well. And because I've been able to maintain as much of my routine as possible, and I feel good. My knees are a little swollen because I've been eating a lot more sugar. But so we have created this culture of masking with just that one little word, or with that one question, that one intersection between two people. Because now if I'm going through a shitty day and someone asks me that question, we all know like, oh, well, no one really cares. No one wants to hear that. Or when we offload because someone has their mask wide open because of a trauma response, as a lot of people can't put that mask on because they're so overstimulated that they are now overwhelming the other person because the other person's conditioned to not receive that answer. When I ask someone how they're doing, I have prepared myself, and maybe this is a little piece of advice for all y'all listening, is that prepare yourself to receive the truth. because that's also what you're wanting. When you go home and you're like, oh man, I don't really feel like my friends really know me. I can't find a relationship where I really truly feel like myself. Partly is because you have not done the work to determine who you are. And you're still wearing a version of the mask that you can't even tell. All because you're not really willing to just tell the truth or receive the truth from someone else without judgment. That person just needs to offload. It doesn't mean that you need to pick it up. It just means that you have to know that that person, they're going through a shitty day and it doesn't need to become yours. And that's this kind of those dynamics that I teach people in therapy, is that, forming boundaries, and a lot of it is a boundary, is that over time, boundaries become like a filtration system. They're almost, I encourage people to view them as like a screen on a window. That you can keep the window open. You have to keep the window open in order to live this life and receive abundance, receive love. But if you didn't have a screen, all the bugs would be coming in, all the birds, all the animals. You ain't Snow White, so you don't want all of that stuff in your house. So when you form boundaries, you have to form a screen, not a wall, not a fence, not, if you got to imagine as a chain link fence at first, do it, because at least it allows stuff to come through. But boundaries are really more about how you filter the messages and the energies that don't work for you because they're someone else's stuff. They work for someone else, and you only receive what oxygen that you really need without all of the other gunk in it. Okay. So that's the mask. That's at least part of it. Once you're able to really embrace vulnerability and practice vulnerability in a balanced way. Now there's, I probably need to go into a whole other talk about what vulnerability is, but if you're wanting to get started on what that is, Brene Brown is The Power of Vulnerability is a really good book. There are other books too that I have a whole book list that if you guys want in on, one of the book lists that I feel like are pretty simple. The Road Less Traveled is another one when it comes to vulnerability. But they don't use the word vulnerability as much. It's just becoming more of a, Brene Brown she's not the first person who did it, but who used the word, but it's been mostly kind of brought to the top in the surface of the conversation when it comes to mental health because of her TED Talk, because of the research she's done. But there are plenty of other people who've been talking about this for a long time. I just don't know their names off the top of my head. So when you're talking about that mask, really taking and embracing vulnerability, it is a very subtle switch into this discomfort and the fear of the unknown to embracing the unknown. Like now I live this life of vulnerability. Is like I could be wrong at any point. Every step that I take. And that is also what allows me to take responsibility for the things and the impact that I had, but also not take too much responsibility for the things that other people need to take responsibility for, because you can sense it now, because you're not masked, because you don't have this layer and this barrier for you to really interpret information anymore, that you're able to make a decision on that information and not a judgment. And you don't lose the lessons that you really need and the information that's really necessary for you to actually calm down. So that is probably one of the biggest things. So judgment, self-judgment, always. If you're judging other people or you feel like other people are judging you, take a look in the mirror. That's why, I'm going to go ahead and, because I got some bold statements that are probably going to come out, when I start releasing a lot more of this content and going live. But narcissism is this huge trendy term right now. You've been a victim of narcissistic abuse. I would encourage you to be cautious around the word victim and that identity, because we can easily attach to it and that becomes problematic. But we're all narcissists. If you want to know how to find a narcissist, go look in a mirror. That's the whole point, right? It's not just a blonde joke. It's not. Stereotypes exist for a reason. Narcissists exist for a reason. Narcissists are just really hurt people who have not been taught how to take responsibility, because they've been taking responsibility for too much of something that's not theirs, and trauma and all this stuff. And so you need to know how to identify them, because you need to know how to identify when you're acting out of a place of narcissistic selfishness because your needs are not met, because you you didn't have a filtration system or a boundary to indicate to yourself, I'm doing too much. My needs are not addressed. I have to pull back here, because when we give too much, any giver becomes a taker as long if they don't have an indication of when they've gave way too much. So therefore, everyone can become a narcissist. I've been a narcissist in my relationships. I've been the person that has hurt people because I lost focus on what my needs were in order to be and sustain and maintain a relationship. I was doing too much. So those stories will, be in the more inner circle conversations. But the point being is that if you are fearful of being in a narcissistic relationship, you are going to attract one, because fear attracts fear. And narcissists preys on fear. Like that, the people who are really solidified in their narcissism, because those are the people that you need to learn about how to tell what they're capable of. And if you don't know what you're capable of, you can easily become that person as well. And therefore you just continue the cycle within your relationships. And that's what, sorry, I alluded to a whole other conversation, and why therapy is just not that easy. You can't do it on yourself. You can do a lot of self-study. You can do a lot of practices. But when it comes to at least the type of therapy that I do, is I'm going to challenge you to think about certain things, because we don't often think about them because we're thinking about all the other shit that's happened to us. Once you clear out all of that reactiveness and the trauma that's happened to you, and you learn how to really sit in vulnerability with it and not allow your reaction to overcome you, then you can transition into into that preventative space of like, how do I prepare for the next time that this happens to me? Because it's going to happen. And if it's not a relationship that's really toxic, it's going to be a death. It's going to be a parent that you lose. It's going to be a friendship that you lose. It's going to be a breakup where your foundation is going to feel like it's stripped out from underneath you because it was never truly solidified in the first place. So let me make sure I hit all my... Yeah, everything else was like more of like a visual representation of like an example. A hurt animal is where I came up as. If you've ever seen an animal who is hurt, who's had an injury, they become very aggressive. It's because they are in a reactive mode of vulnerability. They know that they are at a disadvantage, so therefore they become aggressive. And when we're talking about vulnerability, you're not allowing yourself to just be hurt. You're doing something with that hurt, whether that be nothing. Doing nothing is doing something when you're at least practicing it with intention. Or you are moving that energy, you're moving that stress energy through your body in different movements ways, whether that be the visualization and mindfulness, or whether that actually be exercise, movement, stuff like that. And you are able to get into a recovery mode. That's the importance of why we do have to kind of let this internalized capitalistic productivity society push us over the edge just a little bit, because it does provide some momentum, but we can't fully rely on and sustain on that particular motivation factor. So when next time you see a hurt animal, that ultimately that's more of the authenticity side of vulnerability. There's still a little bit more that you have to do in order to acknowledge, like, you know what, I'm hurt. Because then you see, once people are persistent enough with a hurt animal, yes, they could hurt you. Now I'm talking about like a dog, not say if you see a hurt bear or a tiger or anything like that, don't go approach it. But if you see a hurt animal that, needs help, more than likely, if you're consistent in being present for it and being cautious and being respectful to the fact that it is hurt, once you actually get closer, they're not going to do anything because they know they need help. They know that they can't do it on their own. Recovery is not something that you can do on your own. So you have a lot of work to do on your own, but you do not ever do it alone. There's always community around, and that's because you've built it and you were intentional about accepting it, and you can't fully accept it with a mask on. So I'm drawing the line there. I would like y'all all to think about, what does your mask look like? When do you put it on? Why do you put it on? Who do you put it on around? And what is it actually serving you? Because if you can create that argument of like, okay, is it serving you or is it really just not productive? Then you can take a look at like, how do you take it off? And I will leave you with this, is that all masks they exist for a reason. They can be useful and they have to be put back on around certain people, but sprinkle a little intention on that thought process of like, why do you have to put it on with this person? And have you tried anything different in a while? Because if you haven't tried being vulnerable with someone who you just kind of assume that the mask has to be on around, then you're just confirming that they don't have the ability to know who you are and what you're about, and you don't get to practice being that, but you haven't tried in like 5 years. You haven't tried taking it off. So I challenge you to see whether or not you can test out, can I take my mask off with these people? Can I be a little bit more honest with myself and with others with these people? And where do I truly have to put it on in order to reduce the consequence of taking on too much of other people's negativities, too much of other people's judgment? Because sometimes that's just too much, but they exist for a reason and they're never to be thrown away. They're just to be used with more intention. So I hope that helps someone today. If you guys have any thoughts about what the mask is and how it relates to mental health and your mental health, how to take it off, then please leave a comment. I'll get to you as soon as possible. You can send me an email and you can visit my website. And yeah, I've got some subscription model program set up to help people be guided through some of the main lessons of like incorporating and transitioning into a recovery-based lifestyle. And so check me out at sarawilderlcsw.com, and I will see you guys next Friday.